We continue with our discussion on Ultratech Cement, and in this particular video, we're going to look at extending our analysis to the cost drivers. We have already done the revenue drivers till now, so we'll begin working on the cost drivers and the main ones as we go along. Now, we already know what the major costs are. We can see them from the P&L statement, and those are the headers that are given. Cost of materials, purchase of stock in trade, changes in inventory. The first three put together would be the broad raw material cost for the company, the sum of these three. Then we have salaries, which is not a very big part. We have power and fuel, we have freight and forwarding expenses and other expenses. And then there's some captive consumption for cement, right? So I'm going to basically first plot or put all these here so that we find it easy to kind of work with the numbers and project them here itself as we go along. So we're going to link FY13 to P&L FY13 and just drag it here, just double click it here. So we have the data for the last 4 years that is available. Now we take them one by one. So we say total RM cost, and I'll put that in INR crore, and that's the sum of the first three: cost of materials consumed, any purchase of stock in trade, and changes to inventory, right? That's how we come up with the raw material cost, and we plug the numbers here, right? Now this is in INR crore, and raw material cost should be directly linked to the production that the company has done, right? So I want to find out total raw material cost in INR per ton, right? In INR per ton of cement that we are producing, right? So do we know what is the INR per ton cement we are producing? That's available in terms of the production of the company. That's here, right? That's in million tons. So we just have to be careful once again saying that this number is in crores. So the cost has to be first converted to millions. So we multiply this with 10, and so now the cost is converted to millions, and then we basically divide this number by the production, which is in million tons here. So 40.1. So this gives us 725 rupees per ton is raw material cost, and that's been increasing, right? That's been increasing over the years. What is the raw material cost per ton? And I will put a change in RM cost number here in percentage terms, and that's today divided by last year minus 1, and we get the change data as well, right? So effectively, because it's a number of percentage, I'm going to convert it to a blue color and italicize it, right? That is the raw material cost per ton, right? And what is the price per ton we have seen? Cement realizations per ton is 5676, out of which about 836 is purely the raw material that goes into cement. Now, what is the raw material that goes into cement? That's all your limestone, gypsum, etc. that you find is going to be your raw material. And just in case we are intrigued and interested in finding out what those raw materials are, we could actually go to the annual report and search for the term raw material, and you'll find that in the P&L you have the cost of raw materials consumed, which is available here under unit 23. So we can go ahead and look at the note 23, and within the note 23 raw materials consumed, you will find this entire detail of what are the major raw materials. So limestone, fly ash, gypsum, sand, others. And you can then use this in your estimates in terms of trying to find out what is the limestone cost, what is the fly ash cost, what is the gypsum cost. Are there any relevant parameters that are coming in newspapers or news about the company which say that a certain amount of these costs are going up or going down? That might give you a broader understanding on how these data points might be relevant in projections in subsequent years, right? Remember, however, these are just part of the entire thing. This 3554 is what contains there. Rest of it is kind of going to remain kind of constant. So to that extent, we have a broader understanding of what is the total raw material cost. The same thing can be done for the other costs. So let's look at employee benefit expenses. Employee expenses, and we are going to put them again in INR crore, and we are just going to calculate, put the data from here. Now, what should employee base depend on, right? In one way, we can find out employee expenses also per ton of production, right? Let's try and see employee expenses in terms of INR per ton of production. Although that may not give us the best idea, and let's see how that pans out. So this into 10 to convert it to millions divided by the production, right? And let's see this, and let's see the change. Now that's one way to look at it, where employee expense has kind of gone up in terms of per ton of production. A slightly better way to look at it is probably INR per ton capacity, right? Maybe INR per ton capacity might be slightly better. So we have 241, 249, 278, 282. If I change this number C9 to the capacity number here, which is available here, right, 52.3, that gives me another set of measures. Now, when you are producing more, ideally you will have some employees based on capacity, regardless of whether you're using that capacity or not. A lot of the other labor would be contracted labor, but practically it's a better idea to link all this to capacity, purely because of the fact that even if you have a new plant where you're not producing too much, you will still have to have some employees there and give them some increase in their salary. So we're going to put it here that per ton capacity, the employee cost is going to be 185 rupees, and that's what we've calculated. Right now comes the major parts, which are power and fuel and freight and forwarding. Right, so I'm going to put in power and fuel expenses. Again, we're going to look at these sets of data, but again, power is going to now be on per ton production, right? So let's actually go here and change. I'm going to link this to the power and fuel cost, and this is going to be this into 10 divided by my production, which is C9. That's here, and I can track this and I can format this. So now interestingly, we find power cost has gone down dramatically from 1071 per ton to 891 per ton, right? So cost of power in the entire power and fuel in the entire production has improved dramatically in this period, right? Now, what do we mean by the fact that this has improved dramatically? Once again, we can try and go to the annual report and maybe search for things around power consumption, and we see that the company has said that the company moderated power consumption, which is kilowatt per ton cement produced, by 4.1 units. So earlier, if there were 100 units being used per ton cement produced, now there are 96 units being used, and which is the lowest power consumption benchmarks in the country. That's because the company has its own captive power plants, and they have a waste heat recovery capacity, which has resulted in an increase in recovery, and that has resulted in fuel conservation, essentially, right? The company uses industrial waste as an alternative fuel in cement, reducing the requirement of natural raw materials without compromising this. It's quadrupled pet coke consumption, etc., and now driven completely by pet coke, petroleum coke, which is cheaper, and now most of Ultratech units are completely driven by pet coke, reducing cost of core fuels. So essentially, that's what the company has mentioned in terms of how they have taken all this data and reduced this cost of power. There are more data points available in the annual report. I would urge you to read there and understand those as well. Next one is freight and forwarding. This is the transportation cost that is there, and we are again going to write this here and change here, and I'm going to link this to the cell where the cost is mentioned. And again, freight is going to be based on production, so this is equal to this into 10 divided by C9. C9 was the production, if you remember, and that's almost equal to the power cost here, but in subsequent years that jumps up dramatically, right? So freight cost has gone up, and that's one of the bigger challenges for the company. That's probably because the methods of transportation that they're using, like rails and transport on road, the cost has gone up there, probably because of increase in diesel prices across these years, and that has resulted in a higher freight and forwarding costs that come here, and that becomes an important ingredient in our overall understanding as we go along, right? So that's the freight and forwarding cost. What other costs are left? Now there are some other costs which are there, which should again be a part of your overall sales volume. So I'll say other expenses, and once again I'm going to take them in terms of production, because production is almost similar to the sales. So other expenses is also a reasonably big header, and this into 10 divided by C9 is what we get. Let's format it, let's drag it here, let's copy and paste it here. So we now have some semblance of our understanding in terms of what these numbers are, how these numbers are going ahead, and what kind of changes are we seeing in terms of raw material cost, in terms of power and fuel expenses, in terms of freight and forwarding. Those are the three major cost headers that we have to be careful about. Rest everything is not that big a problem, because on a per ton basis, these three numbers are the biggest numbers which we need to consider and be careful with, right? So effectively, that's your major cost drivers. There are some other costs like finance costs and depreciation, which we will come to when we start discussing the balance sheet drivers. And as we do that, it would basically give us a little bit more understanding on how to project these drivers in the overall context of our cost drivers, right? So that's it in the cost drivers section. Thank you.